Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Let's Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by our prospect expert, Justin Lorber, a.k.a. Future Dodgers. He had a mid-season update a few weeks ago while I was gone, but we're excited to dive into it now. Justin, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the season, Miguel Vargas makes a debut, James Outman makes a debut, Ryan Pepio is up. It's an exciting year for a prospect guy in Dodgers land.
It is. It's kind of all coming together. They've got all these guys so close to the majors. I tweeted this out a few days ago. Five of my top 7 guys, and I think like the general consensus top 7 are all at AAA right now. And that's the first time I went back and looked at my rankings. There was a 5-day period back in 2019 when Will Smith was still in the minors where they had my top 5 guys all at AAA. So first time in a few years. The system is, of course, now in a similar spot as they were back in 2019. So, yeah, fun time to be a Dodger prospect fan.
Yeah, and look, you and I were pro trade guys away, go get Juan Soto. They didn't do it. That's helpful for a conversation like today. It makes us feel better. But let's start big picture. I mean, depending on where you look, this is a top 5 farm system. Some places I think have them as high as number 1 or number 2. But big picture, as you put together your list, and you can check this stuff out at futuredodgers.com. Justin's got a prospect portal. I believe you've got 101 players ranked. As you put that list together in the midseason this year, what were some of the big picture takeaways that you had?
I think the first big picture is depth. And this is something that, is pretty constant with the Dodgers system is they have these guys who they find, mid-level international signings or mid-round, even some day 3 picks who end up becoming, pretty notable prospects. But I think that's definitely apparent with this list as well. Guys that they've gotten in trades, River Ryan, who they got in the Matt Beatty trade, which is, that's a DFA trade, and he is a legit prospect, a guy to follow. And normally you don't get that with guys from DFA trades. Nick Frasso, who they got in Mitch White trade, super interesting dude. So they've been able to add not just from the draft and from the international market, but also from trades. And, it just keeps the system going. And I mentioned 2019 a couple minutes ago. That's the last time their system was really like at the top of baseball when you had Lux and May and Ruiz and Will Smith and Tony Gonsolin. And that system was probably the best in baseball at that point when those guys were all in minors. And now, since then, in 2019, they won 106 games. 2020, they won the World Series, and they were either set or were close to setting the win percentage record for a season. 2021, they won 106 games. And this year, they're on pace for another 100-plus win season. And in that time, all those guys have graduated, and they've traded a bunch of guys, and their system is now once again among the best in baseball. And that isn't really supposed to happen under the current structure. The teams, obviously the international market's a little different because there isn't a draft and guys can sign with whoever they want. But the draft is supposed to funnel the highest impact players to the worst teams. And then those teams rise up and they have really strong farm systems, and it's cyclical. And the Dodgers have rebuilt their farm system since 2019. All those young guys really basically all playing a role now. Gonsolin and Lutz and May and Smith. And Hubert Ruiz was a big part of the now Trey Turner trade. So the way that they've rebuilt their system, it's just, you kind of just go like, damn, like they're just good at this.
Yeah, I remember Pedro Mora, I believe, I forget the name of the book, but he wrote a book on the Dodgers, and he said, as what you just said, the system is designed to prevent the Dodgers from doing exactly what they are. They have to pick at the end of the first round. They lose picks and have to pick in competitive balance picks. Their first pick this year was not until very late in the draft. They get the smallest international free agent bonus. Like, all of these things exist to prevent the Dodgers, and yet it doesn't matter. The Dodgers have not sold big stars in exchange for prospect packages, with the exception of like the Matt Kemp trade with the Reds a while back. It's not like they're the Padres that blow it all up every 3 or 4 years and recoup prospects only to go back in. The Dodgers pump them out, move them to the major league level, the guys produce, and then 2 years later, there's a full set of guys coming back in, which is remarkable, really. One big picture question for you. In my mind, having heard sort of the narratives around the Dodgers, the guys that are talked about most often, it feels like pitching, everybody talks about the Dodgers pitching. When I looked at your top 20, and we'll get into some individual names here in just a second, I was surprised that 10 of the top 20 are hitters. It feels like the way people talk about this system, that it's like 15 of the top 20 are pitchers, and then you've got Vargas and Pages kind of up at the top. How would you sort of explain kind of that difference?
Well, I think the difference is, and this is, I think it can vary from person to person how much they factor this in, but pitching prospects are uncertain. Pitching prospects get hurt. And also, an everyday bat, might be more valuable than a guy who, you're not sure if he's going to start. And obviously those are context individual player dependent evaluations. But for me, I have to think, like, I love this pitcher. I love the stuff, but he's a pitcher. Some people might know the phrase TIN stop, which is an acronym that stands for there is no such thing as a pitching prospect. I don't go that far, but, pitching prospects are uncertain, and you can't, or at least I try not to put too much stock in them when, things can happen. Look no further than a guy like Yadier Alvarez, who might have had some of the best stuff of any Dodger pitching prospect in the last decade, and, hasn't come to fruition. And, that doesn't have to happen with every guy. Dustin May, Walker Buehler, example, but
yeah.
Pitching prospects, it's tough. And while I like a lot of the arms, and you can go down into the 30s and the 40s and pick out arms who are really interesting, I think there has to be some kind of counterweight to, well, hitters can be a little safer.
Yeah. No, it's a classic prospect farm system debate, is how do you balance the likelihood that this guy will actually succeed with the ceiling? The ceiling of some of these pitchers might be far higher, but the variance and range of outcomes must be much greater. And that's kind of what's fine. And by the way, I do want to make a note real quick, because this is something you said on Twitter around the trade deadline that's important. Rankings are different depending on who you look at, and everybody is going to approach 100 different variables differently. Like you just said, some people don't worry about the range of outcomes with pitchers, and they're ranking guys based on ceiling. So who has the highest ceiling? This guy's my number 2 prospect because he could be a number 1 pitcher. He might not ever make it, but the ceiling is the highest. Other people are combining variance, likelihood, and ceiling all into one bucket. Some people are weighing how close are they to the major leagues versus a guy in high A is never going to be in their top 10, all of those types of things. So I think it's fair and, to point that out. In light of all that, is there anything that you would want to add before we dive into individual players about how you would want somebody to sort of consume your list compared to some of the other lists that are out there?
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, my set of rankings are one of many, and I think they're meant to be consumed that way. If you're reading rankings from one source or taking one source as the accurate rankings or the, objectively, stated rankings, I think that's not the way to, talk about prospects and talk about prospect evaluation, because there is a subjective nature to prospect evaluation, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing when, there is variance in how people view prospects, because if we're all ranking guys the same, A, it's probably not a good thing, and B, it's just, what is there to discuss? Because if everyone has the same kind of hive minds, which is not a thing that exists, obviously, but it's a good thing when, you take my rankings, you take the work that I do, and then you look at Fangraphs or Baseball America or, other amateur guys like Dodgers Digest, and, you look and you see what everyone has to say and you consume it as a whole rather than this one is the right one and other ones are not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the perfect example is, I just think of the Juan Soto trade. There were people that had all sorts of opinions about the prospects that the Padres gave up compared to who the Dodgers had or who they were asked for, etc. And then all of a sudden, I believe it was Keith Law at The Athletic that comes out with his ranking list, and 3 or 4 of the guys that the Padres gave up were all ranked ahead of Diego Cartaya on his list. So that's one list, and you're like, holy smokes, like maybe the Nationals did way better than we anticipated if you like and look at things the way Keith Law did. On the flip side, Jim Bowden comes out with his rankings today, and look, Jim Bowden is Jim Bowden, and we don't need to get into what we think about Jim Bowden, but he has Diego Cartaya as the number 3 prospect in all of baseball on his list. And so those are dramatically different experiences, and that's why a lot of times trades can be so polarizing, because one guy might say, wow, the Padres gave up 3 guys in the top 15 prospects in all of baseball, and another guy might say they didn't give up anybody in the top 30 or 40. So with that said, let's dive in to your rankings. New rankings. You've got a new number 1 on your list. Diego Cartaya moves up to the top spot. You've got Cartaya 1, Bobby Miller 2, Miguel Vargas 3, Andy Pages 4, Gavin Stone 5, Michael Bush 6, Ryan Pepio 7th, Jose Ramos 8th, Nick Nastrini 9th, Maddox Bruns 10th, and while we're here, I'll just mention Dalton Crushing, a.k.a. Dalton Rushing, is number 11 on your list. He was the Dodgers' first pick, not a first rounder, but their first pick in this past draft. So Cartaya 1, Miller 2, Vargas 3. Take this wherever you want to with those top 10 or 11 guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you are holding that up to other systems 1 through 10 or 1 through 11, if you want to include rushing, I mean, I think it holds up to just about any system.
Yeah.
Specifically that first 7. Those are 7, probably legitimate top 100 or so guys in baseball, depending on where you look.
Yeah.
And all of them, basically all of them, are near-term contributors. The furthest one away, the only one below AA, is Diego Cartaya, who most people have as their best prospect, and I do now. So I have Bobby Miller in my number 1 spot for the past couple sets of rankings, and this is less of a reflection of what Bobby Miller didn't do than what Diego Cartaya has done. He has been one of the best hitters in the Dodgers system as a catcher, as a 20-year-old catcher, splitting time between low A and high A. The defensive skills, I've read some reports that they've taken a step back, but still a strong arm. He's been praised for his, off the field, intangible mental skills. And, that's important, especially with a young catcher, a guy who, if you're bringing him up, you're probably going to bring him up ahead of schedule if he's coming there for his bat. And if you're trusting him with a playoff caliber pitching rotation, you want him to have, plus marks on that side of the ball too. So just a really well-rounded catcher, a guy who looks like he could be an all-star for quite some time.
Yeah. Will Smith is Dodgers catcher. I think he's the best catcher in all of baseball. I don't know if you agree with that praise, but you definitely agree he's one of the top 3 catchers in all of baseball. He's not going anywhere anytime soon, we hope. Cartaya, the bat is what's going to carry him. There's questions about the defense. In your estimation, if this weren't the Dodgers, would you still feel confident about projecting him as a major league catcher and being able to play defense there? That's question 1. Question 2, if you're specifically the Dodgers, how quickly does this guy come up and become your designated hitter?
So the first question, I think, yeah. There aren't defensive worries where it's like, oh, well, he's going to have to move off. He has to go to third, or he has to go to first, or he has to go to left field. No, not really those types of questions. And another guy, we've talked about this on this show in past shows. Most people assume that the robo-umps will be here, maybe not next year, but sooner rather than later, once they get that worked out. And, that's only going to help a guy like Tartaya stay behind the plate. As for, so, and this is part of the discussion, as for when you bring him up, the DH now in the National League makes that a lot easier because it's another spot where you can find everyday at bats for a guy like Tartaya or Will Smith if you want to switch them out. Ultimately, and the Mets are going through a similar kind of dilemma right now with Francisco Alvarez, their top prospect, who is the same age as Diego Cartaya, who's in AAA right now. And they have really weak catching, unlike the Dodgers. And so now they're facing the dilemma of, well, do we bring him up? Do we bring him up just to DH? Do we bring him up to catch? Because there's an argument he's the best catcher in the organization as it stands today. And the Dodgers aren't going to have that dilemma, so they can afford to wait a little bit on Diego Cartaya. But he should start next year at AA. And if he mashes like he has this year, there's a good shot he'll get an in-season promotion to AAA. And once he's there, it's like, well, he's one step away. And the other thing is he'll be on the 40-man roster next year. He has to be added this winter to be protected from the Rule 5 draft. And if there was ever such a thing as an absolute lock to be added to a 40-man roster, it's Diego Cartaya this offseason. So he will be added. He will be on the 40-man roster. And, there are 40 spots there. So if it gets to the point where, it's July or it's August or it's September and he's at AAA, and whether he's just hitting or there's an injury, he could be brought up. I could see a scenario where he's in the majors at the end of next year. But I think if you're talking about likelihood, probably 2024.
Okay. Yeah, and you look at Austin Barnes signs a 2-year extension, so he's under contract through 2024 as the backup catcher, which is interesting. You've got Justin Turner, who's got a player option for a club option for next year without really an obvious defensive position now that Max Muncy is also, his club option was picked up. So there's not really DH at bats on paper next year. And even the catching position, Barnes under contract through the 2024 season. So curious to see how that one shakes out. Let's move to Bobby Miller. You kind of touched on it. He's moved down, but it sounds like it's way more about Cartaya moving up than Miller moving down. Although, if you're a box score person and you're looking at Bobby Miller's box score, it hasn't been great this year. So any level of concern with Bobby Miller, or do you just look at this stuff and say, screw the ERA, the stuff is what it is and no worries?
I think overall, this stuff is among the best in the minor leagues. There's the potential here for 4 legit plus pitches: fastball, curveball, changeup, slider. And I trust the Dodgers with a guy like that. I trust the Dodgers to help him finish off to where he needs to be when they need him in the major leagues. And look, I know people have been kind of clamoring for him to come up this season. That doesn't need to happen. He doesn't need to be in the majors this season.
Yeah.
He's at AAA. He's one step away. He's working on what he needs to. And I think the other half of that is, yes, you can look at the box score, but he's not necessarily, part of minor league development is you work on things in certain starts.
Right.
So there might be certain starts where he's emphasizing his curveball, he's emphasizing his slider, he's emphasizing his changeup, or he's working on certain locations with his fastball or anything else. So it's not like, okay, every start, he threw the optimal pitch in every situation. So, this is how it needs to be evaluated. Guys are working on stuff, and that's what the minor leagues are for. And that's why, just looking at the box scores, won't always tell you how a guy's doing.
Okay. Number 3, Miguel Vargas. We've seen him make his major league debut. The bat is legit. It looks every bit the part. Where are you at on Miguel Vargas defensively? I know there have been concerns about where he sticks, if he sticks defensively. Third base, is that where you land?
I mean, I think that's his most likely outcome, especially, at least if he stays a Dodger, because Freddie Freeman's over there first. But he's a guy who I could see moving around, playing some second base. Now, they've had him in left field for, I think, maybe just like a handful of games, so I could see them throwing him out here as well, getting some at-bats at DH. So a guy who I expect, if he's in the majors, will move around a little bit, maybe even playing some first base if they can ever convince Freddie Freeman to take a day off, which...
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, the bat's the carrying tool, and the bat has carried him through the minor leagues. He has not had an unsuccessful minor league stint at any stop. He has just hit at every stop. At every stop, he's been below the league average for age. He's 22 right now, and he's hit above average in AAA. He's one of the younger players in the Pacific Coast League, and he's hit well. And the other thing here, at least compared to my preseason rankings, is the max exit velocity, which was a bit of a question. Some people use that as a proxy for raw power. That has increased. That has been up to 112, which is plus raw power. So that's a question for me that was answered as part of this season. And, of course, the Dodgers brought him up because they liked what he was doing, because they didn't have to do that either. He doesn't need to be added until after this season, but they brought him up for a couple of games for a cup of coffee, and we saw a little bit what he can do.
Okay, we're going to get to Gavin Stone, who's number 5, in just a second. I want to talk Pages and Bush real quick because, like you said, there's kind of a top 7. Pepio's number 7, who we've all seen. Not that he's not worth talking about, but Pages at 4, Bush at 6. These are two guys that I feel like everyone loves Miguel Vargas right now. Cartaya, everybody knows about. Bobby Miller, everybody knows about. Gavin Stone's the sexy new thing that's creeping up top 100 list. Ryan Pepio's in the major league. Pages is AA, so that's part of the reason he's one of the younger guys further away. And then there's Michael Bush. These two guys nobody talks about. Jim Bowden, though, today has Michael Bush as the number 50 prospect in all baseball and 3rd in the Dodger system. Again, I'm not saying, defend yourself, Justin, for why he's 6th and not 3rd, but there are people that are incredibly high on Michael Bush, a former top pick, and people want to talk about. So what's the headline for you on Pages, and what's the headline for you on Michael Bush, both now and maybe what this looks like in the next couple of years?
Pages, I love Andy Pages. He is probably my favorite prospect in the system. I am super high on him. And I think I had him at 3 entering the year, and him at 4 now. Really, there is no different. I think when you look at those top 7 guys, there are a wide array of ways that you can order them. And I think that would be reasonable. And even, if you have a guy like a Jose Ramos or a Nick Destrini and you want to move them above one of those guys too, totally fine with that too. But just speaking specifically about Pages, there's power. He has not struck out or swung and missed like a lot of the power first bats. He hasn't been phenomenal AA. His weighted runs created plus has been hovering around 100, which is league average, but he's 21 years old. He's in AA, he's 21, and he's been about a league average bat with plus power, and he's played some center field, although he's going to profile better in right field with a really, really strong arm. That is a valuable player. And so in a lot of other systems, you're talking about a guy who might be the number one, maybe in some weaker systems, or number two or definite number three in a lot of other systems. In the Dodgers system, yeah, he can get overlooked a little bit, especially when there are other guys like Gavin Stone having huge breakout years. And as for Michael Busch, tore up AA for a month, went to AAA. Hasn't been phenomenal, but he showed the power, he showed the patience, although he hasn't walked as much as he usually had. And he's also played a little bit of left field, which is the first time he's played left field since he was in college. He played left field, right field, first base in college. The Dodgers played him almost exclusively at second base in the minors so that he can work on that. And, he's never going to be a Gold Glove defensive second baseman, but he's a guy who you put him at second, you put him at left, DH, maybe even a little first base. Again, if you can find a way to hide Freddie Freeman for a day.
Yeah.
A guy who can play against righties. There's been some concern there against lefties, but I think the splits I saw, he was hitting them pretty well this year. Although, sample size warning accordingly.
Yeah.
But two more guys who you look at other systems, number one, number two, number three, almost certainly.
Yeah. Okay. Next question here. Talk to me about some guys who are moving up. This is where I'll let you talk about Gavin Stone, because Stone was 29th in your system a year ago, 14th at the beginning of the season. He's all the way up to 5. We joked beforehand. I had Rob Hill, the minor league pitching coordinator, on this show, and I asked him about 20 different prospects and did not mention Gavin Stone this season. And I was like, is there anybody I'm missing? And he was like, nobody is talking about Gavin Stone. This guy's a freak. And sure enough, 6 weeks later, he's in top 100 list. So talk to me about Stone and then any other guys, who are kind of on their way up, moving up the list in your rankings.
Yeah, Gavin Stone, he's a dog. He's just a really, really good pitcher. Another guy with 4 pitches, but primarily 3. The changeup is the pitch that stands out for me. There's a lot of horizontal movement. He throws it to righties. He throws it to lefties. He'll back foot it to righties. He'll throw the high changeup to both lefties and righties. So that for me, I love when a guy is able to kind of manipulate their changeup and use that as like a true swing and miss pitch, and that's what it is for him. It's a mid-90s fastball. It's been up to 98. He's got like a low-ish release, not super low. So while it doesn't stand out with like plus vertical movement, the release and the shape kind of make it work. It's got a little bit of run too, and he's used that for swing and misses. And this was a guy who was at the top of the system in strikeout to walk ratio for most of the season. He's not there anymore because he's faced some more advanced hitting, but he's still, not really a guy that you worry about. Well, is this guy going to find the zone enough to be a starter? This is a high probability for me starting pitcher in the big leagues, and whether that's like a number 3 or even like a number 2 or more of like a number 4 or 5, I think he has the highest probability of being a starter in this system right now.
And it's interesting with him because he doesn't need to be protected in the Rule 5 till 2023. And with all of the guys that we're going to talk about here at the end that need to get added, I mean, do you think we're not going to see him until 2023 just because they're going to be so crunched on 40-man spot, or do you think he's going to force their hand?
I don't know. When you say 2023, do you mean the end of 2023 or like mid-season next year?
Yeah, so you've got Cartaya as needing to be protected in the Rule 5 draft at the end of this season. Gavin Stone would not need to be added to the 40-man roster to be protected until the end of the 2023 system, right before the 2024 season.
I think if it's working out that deadline, yeah. I think we probably see him at some point next year, maybe him and or Bobby Miller. So those guys are in AAA right now. I would expect them to get a big league shot at some point. You get to next year and it's kind of like where you were this year with Ryan Pepio and Miguel Vargas. And it's like, well, you need a guy to fill a spot for a few days.
Yeah.
He's got to be added anyway, so we might as well add him now, get him some big league time and see how he does. So those guys I would expect at some point next year.
Anybody else sort of looking down, guys who have jumped You've got Edgardo Enriquez. He's up to 14, was 27 at the beginning of the year. Kyle Hurt up to 15 from 34. Those are just guys in the top 20, top 30. You talked about River Ryan earlier, 94th coming into the season, 31st at this point. Anybody else that you like that's sort of skyrocketing up? Either it doesn't even have to be in the top half. It could be on the back half of the top 100.
You mentioned those three. Those three are all guys who, for me, took big jumps, at least in my eyes this year. Another couple pitchers, Joelle Ibarra, who was a two-way player, played shortstop in his first professional season. He's since become a full-time pitcher. Super interesting guy at Rancho, a ton of strikeouts. And Ronan Kopp, who was their 12th round pick last year, same age as Peter Hubeck and Maddox Bruns, but he's pitched the best. If you look at guys with 40 innings in the minor leagues, not just Dodgers, all across the minor leagues, he's third in strikeouts per nine. And this is a guy who was 19 for the majority of the season at low A, I think over 15 strikeouts per nine. He just got a promotion this past week to high A, so should be making his first start relatively soon.
Okay. Flip side, this isn't anybody's favorite part of the conversation, but guys that are sliding down the rankings a little bit. I look, Eddie Leonard was 7. He's down to 18. Wilman Diaz was 11. He's down to 26. Andre Jackson was 15, now down to 30. Anybody else outside of those three are guys that, for one reason or another are moving the wrong direction on this list?
So one thing I do want to say, I'll just talk briefly about those three. Eddie Leonard, more of other guys took big jumps, and I want to not anchor myself to what I did last April, March, I don't know, last spring. So, yeah. And I think another thing that I did with this set of rankings, in people might notice I added a future value tier to each player. And for people who just want to strictly, they don't want to deal with any of that, they just want to read it as tiers, they can do that. But I would encourage people to read about future value and how it's applied to prospects. Fangraphs have some really good literature on that. But it's essentially assigning a grade which corresponds to a dollar value for prospects. And that's how a lot of front offices evaluate prospects in trades or just in general. You can use it for the draft. But
so just real quick on that one. So you've got like Dalton Rushing, number 11 prospect, future value tier 45. And then Michael Grove, who's way down at 19, is in the same future value tier. Like, are you saying that it's a way to read those to say, I'm telling you that the gap between 11 and 19, where Eddie Leonard is number 18 there, is not a huge gap. Like, these guys are all sort of in the same bucket, kind of rank them how you will. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, you can look at it like that. And what future value is, it corresponds to, 50 is an average major league player. But baked into that is risk as well. Is if you think this player is an average major league player, what's the likelihood that he gets there? So like Diego Cartaya, his ceiling is best catcher in baseball, which you might say is like a 70. But there's some risk there, even though I'm super high on him, so he's a 60. Got it. And that's a kind of rough, crude way to talk about it, but I want to talk about the player specifically more. So these rankings for me were kind of about evaluating what a certain player's trade value is, because that's one of the ways you can look at prospects, but I felt that was a better way to do it than just, this is the order that I like them in. And, it's always been something that I thought about, but getting it out on paper and, having that be not an objective, a subjective part of the rankings for me was important, because these guys, not all of them, but a lot of these players exist because they will be traded, and evaluating, what is their trade value is important, especially when you compare them to guys in other systems. So that's there. And Eddie Leonard, that was more just kind of adjusting to what I think his proper trade value would be, and other guys jumping up more than anything he's done, because he hasn't played bad this year.
Yeah. Diaz, Jackson, kind of the same boat?
The other two, I would say no. Diaz, he was their top international signing last January in 2021, maybe even the top international player overall in that class, and he just hasn't hit. I think there are some legit concerns there now. He was running a strikeout rate of like 40% in the ACL, and look, he's an 18-year-old playing in complex ball, so that's younger, but there are some concerns there. And he's been passed by guys like Randon Zone and Jesus Galiz, and even a guy like Juan Alonso, who was a part of that same class and is now the first one of that class to make it to low A. He was promoted yesterday, and he hit his first home run yesterday too. So he has been kind of surpassed by several players from his same international class. And as for Andre Jackson, I think kind of a similar issue where you've got Ryan Pepio and Michael Grove on the 40-man roster at AAA, who've both kind of jumped him for a spot start when the Dodgers have needed one. And now you've also got guys like Bobby Miller and Gavin Stone in AAA. You've got Nick Destrini one step below in AA. So I think with him, it's more of a concern of where does he kind of fit? And there's been the velocity has been down at times this year. The last few starts, it's been back up. But yeah, so I had some concerns there with the velocity being down at points this year. He'd walked a lot of guys, and the roster crunch kind of questions.
Fair. Before we get into some practical things, let me ask about Dalton Rushing. First pick the Dodgers make this past year. We've seen a very small sample size. He hits a home run every single time he comes up to bat. I think he has like 6 home runs in not very many games. I think as we're recording this, I mean, you have him number 11. It's a small sample size, so it is what it is. But it's hard not to be impressed by what we've seen so far, right?
Oh yeah, he's mashed. And I think this was in an Athletic article. I believe this was the Athletic, but it might not have been someone talking about how people have been talking, and if the draft were held today, he might have gone 10, 20 spots higher than he did, which was 40th overall. And you almost have to kind of laugh because look, it's super early. This guy's been playing for not even a month in minor league baseball, but you just kind of laugh because it's like the Dodgers are going to do Dodger stuff.
Yeah. Any other names you want to mention before we get to, like I said, some practical how this affects the big league club this year and next year kind of stuff? Anyone else you want to mention?
Well, you have the guys on the 40-man, like Amaya and Outman. Those guys are both at AAA.
Let me ask you about Outman. I mean, this is a guy who has sort of been a average major leaguer, maybe, good defense. Will the bat translate? He comes up, he hits. Small sample size, incredibly small sample size. They had no scouting report on him. Did that change your value of Outman at all?
Those 3 games? No, but unfortunately. Memes and other posts aside. But yeah, I think what they do with Cody Bellinger could have an impact on that because they don't really have like a true center fielder in the system unless you think Trace Thompson is the starting center fielder next year. So what they end up doing with Cody Bellinger this offseason could have an effect on whether James Outman is on the major league roster at the start of the season.
I mean, if they came to you and said, hey, we are thinking we don't want to pay Cody Bellinger $18 million next year to play center field. Justin, you're our prospect guy. Can James Outman be a average bat and above average defense for us? Like, do we have a reasonable expectation that we could get that out of a guy like James Outman for $17.9 million less than it would cost us to get that from Cody Bellinger?
Could he be that? Sure, but I don't think you depend on a guy like that just yet. I think if you don't bring back Bellinger, there has to be some kind of external addition there to supplement that. I don't think you can pencil in Outman as the starting center fielder and have that be plan A.
Okay. Anybody else? You mentioned Amaya, other guys that you want to touch on?
In terms of major league closeness,
it doesn't have to be major league closeness. Could be a guy in the complex league that you're like, holy smokes, this guy, I know very little, but I'm excited.
So, yeah, okay. So I'll talk about the complex league guys. But first, I do want to hit on Nick Rosso, who they got in the trade with Toronto for Mitch White. This is a guy who Baseball Prospectus wrote about recently, how they evaluated him for their top overall 50 in baseball. And they wrote why he wasn't in their top 50 because the track record is super short, but the stuff is really, really good. This is a guy where we might look back in a couple of years and be like, how did they do that one? How did they get Nick Brasso out of the Blue Jays system? And for me, those are the fun ones because they don't add guys like that from other systems, really. They add from the draft and they develop, and they add from the international market, they develop, but they don't add guys like that from other systems. And I had him at 17 in that update. And, again, very small sample size in his couple of starts, but in his couple of starts in the system, I might put him a couple spots higher if I were doing it today.
Is there anybody outside of the top, let's say 25, that would not surprise you if that guy was a top 10, 15 prospect, 6 months from now?
Outside of the top 25. So I think all the complex lead guys, and I mentioned some of them earlier, Juan Alonso and Rain Danzone, or even Jesus Galiz, those guys should all take a jump if they're at low A next year and they're doing well. And then River Ryan, really legit stuff. Mid to upper 90s fastball, one of the better fastballs from a stuff perspective in the system is what I've been told. And, a hard, low 90s, cutter slider hybrid. So super interesting guy. He's at high A right now. And again, for them to get him in a DFA trade, really, really good work by them, by their scouting and then by their development.
Emmett Sheehan, right in the middle of that, is the guy that's had some buzz lately. River Ryan taught him how to throw a slider, it sounds like, and that slider is now absolutely disgusting. So, that feels like the way that he's being mentioned is hey, we're giving you a 6 months warning on the next Gavin Stone, and it's this guy, Emmett Sheehan, 4th round pick last year.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for, the next Gavin Stone, as in a guy who they took in the mid rounds, Nick Nastrini is already kind of a bigger name. But yeah, Sheehan's right up there. Ton of ride on the fastball. And yeah, I read that FanGraphs article as well this week where he learned a new slider from River Ryan when River Ryan got promoted. And, he likes throwing it, and it's done well so far in a couple of starts.
That might be, the Matt Beatty trade might be worth it, if only because Emmett Sheehan learned a different slider, and maybe that's a game changer. We look back and say, River Ryan, whatever he turns out to be, Emmett Sheehan. Okay, a couple quick ones. We've kind of touched on this one. Walker Buehler, Tommy John surgery announced this week. Will miss all of next season. We talked about on our shows Tony Gonsolin, Dustin May, and Julio Urias, the only 3 pitchers the Dodgers have under contract next year. You could add in Pepio and Michael Grove, Andre Jackson. Those are the 6 guys on the 40-man roster. Of course, Anderson, Kershaw, and Heaney will all be free agents. Bobby Miller, Ryan Pepio, Gavin Stone, are any of those guys that you look to even as soon as opening day of 2023 and say, you know what, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay with these guys as the number 4, as the number 5 in a rotation? Or do the Dodgers need to tweak some things and give those guys a little bit more time?
I think from a perspective of what they've done before, they'll probably get 1, 2, if not even 3 external additions. Yeah, I can't imagine, based on especially how they acted this past offseason, bringing in Andrew Heaney, bringing in Tyler Anderson, when it seemed like there really wasn't a spot for him. Yeah. Pitchers get hurt, spots open up, and you need pitching depth. And the Dodgers know that, and they have the money to go get guys on 1-year deals like Heaney and Anderson and have them there as their pitching depth. And, maybe, during camp, you have a 5th spot open and you say, well, we have this guy we signed to a 1-year deal, insert reclamation project pitcher here, maybe Garrett Richards, who got released a couple of days ago by the Rangers. You've got Pepio, you've got Grove, and then you've got the non-40-man guys like Stone and Miller or anyone else. And one of those guys is going to win the 5th spot in camp. That I could see. I don't see 2 spots being available.
Okay. The last question here is something you and I have talked about, the 40-man roster crunch. Rule 5, at the end of the season, some point in the offseason, a bunch of guys have to be protected after a certain amount of time in the system. The Dodgers added 5 guys last year for a Rule 5 draft that it didn't end up happening. I bet they wish they would have gotten some heads up on whether the Rule 5 draft was happening, because a number of those guys are not going to play in the major leagues. They could have saved themselves a hassle. But you look at your top rankings, Cartaya needs to be added. Pages needs to be added. Bush needs to be added. Ramos needs to be added. There's 4 of your top 8 prospects that need to be added to this list by this offseason. Otherwise, they will become eligible. Bobby Miller, Gavin Stone, 2023 guys. Nastrini, Bruns, 2024, and on it goes. Carlos Duran is another 2022 guy down at number 20. So how do you see that playing out? As well as Eddie Leonard, Gorby Vivas, Jacob Amaya, guys that are currently on the 40-man roster that were protected. Obviously, you can't just unprotect them now. You would have to DFA them, which I don't think they will do. But I mean, it just feels like a trade is coming, right?
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see some kind of trade, whether it's, the guys who need to be added or some of the guys who were added last year, like Vivas and Amaya and Outman and Leonard, just to clear up some space. But yeah, you mentioned it. 4 of my top 8, and I think 3 of those are absolute locks. Tartaya and Pages and Bush. Those guys are going to be on. No doubt about it. I really think Ramos will. My thought is if they protected Vivas and Leonard this year or last year, I think they'll protect Ramos again. But the other side of that is you might have 4 spots going to Vivas and Leonard and Cartaya and Jose Ramos, guys who are starting out in Double-A. And, unless they get a promotion here in the last couple of weeks of the minor league season, 4 guys who have not played above high A, 4 hitters who have not played above high A. And those are 4 spots of guys who probably aren't seeing major league time that year. And, you don't have to have, a full 40 man of guys who, can contribute to a major league roster in any given season. But moving that down to 36 makes it a little tougher, I think. So
yeah, I mean, Go ahead. I was just going to say, you've got 8 guys already in your prospect rankings who are already on the 40-man roster who still have prospect status. Guys like Pepio at the top of that list, but then you've got Andre Jackson down towards the bottom as well. So that's 8 plus 4 more. I mean, that's 12 guys on a 40-man roster that some of whom, aren't contributing or don't have space to contribute right off the bat. There's 26 guys on an active roster. And so that's pretty much, if 8 of those 12 are not able or eligible to contribute at the major league level, that feels like too much. So again, you were the one that alerted to me to this, but it just feels like, whether it's somebody like Andre Jackson, who knows, there might not even be trade value for someone like that, but at least if you can flip some of these guys, a Jacob Amaya type, if you're saying he's not going to be our shortstop this year, we don't have the need for a backup infielder because Hanser Alberto's on another year contract, can we flip him for a guy that we can stash that's 3 years away from needing to be added, that kind of thing. It just feels like some of those around the fringes moves are on their way.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think more likely than someone like Amaya being moved would be someone like Vivas or Leonard or Ramos, one of the further away guys.
Okay.
Whereas, Amaya, you can very feasibly see him playing a major league bench role next year. Whereas those guys, probably not. And then, you mentioned Carlos Duran, super high upside arm, 6'7", has been into the upper 90s. He's at high A right now. He's been hurt for parts of the year. He's been building back up. He missed the first 2 months or so with a shoulder issue. I don't know if he gets added. Johnny Deluca has been one of the, I think, biggest surprises in the system this year. He's shown power, he's shown speed, one of the better swinging strike rates in the system too. He hasn't swung and missed a whole lot. And he's a Double-A. He can play all 3 outfield positions. He's a potential add. Brian Ward, who was leading the system, and I think is tied for the system lead right now in homers before he got hurt a few weeks ago down in Double-A. He's more of a corner-only bat, left field, maybe some right field, maybe some first base. But do you add him? He'll be eligible. A guy like Ryan Noda or Devin Mann, guys at Triple-A, they were eligible last year when there was no Rule 5 draft. They'll be eligible again. Yamir Garcia, who's had a huge last couple months, earned a promotion to high A. I think he's too far away to be added, but another high upside guy who will be eligible. So some interesting decisions beyond definitely the first 3, and I think likely Ramos.
Yeah. Well, Johnny Deluca, if they decide not to keep Tyler Anderson, there's a one University of Oregon player on the 40-man roster. That's a rule that I have for the Dodgers, and so they got rid of Clevenger. I don't know if Jake Reed's still floating around somewhere, but Tyler Anderson, if he's not back, DeLuca's going to have to get added to that list just so we can keep the duck train going. So, hey, Justin, we appreciate your time. Thank you for all your work on this. Super appreciate you walking us through it. Again, you're the guy I go to for prospects, and when you've got, arguably the best farm system in all of baseball, it's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. So you guys can check out Justin at Future Dodgers on social media, futuredodgers.com. You go there, you can see his rankings. He's got descriptions on all these guys, blurbs, that kind of stuff. So please, please, please check that out. Justin, thank you again for everything, folks. We appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.